OSTP to form a committee to harmonize regulations. Harmonization is a key way to save researchers' administrative time. For that reason, I was a little surprised by the treatment of research misconduct. When I was at OSTP, it took me 3 years to get all the agencies to agree on a common definition of research misconduct and on common procedures for dealing with an allegation of research misconduct. So it was surprising to find in the same act a section that would completely deharmonize NSF from all the other agencies in the treatment of allegations of research misconduct. It would be particularly troublesome in a situation in which a paper was funded by both the NSF and the NIH, for example, and in which there was an allegation of research misconduct. Because NSF was a funder, the Inspector General would have a responsibility for dealing with the allegation. Because the NIH was a funder, the university would have the responsibility or initial responsibility with dealing with it. I think that section is going to create real problems for the community. Let me say what's more, that as Stanford's Vice Provost for Research, I had to deal with allegations of misconduct. Some of them are really subtle. And I was fortunate that I could immediately call upon faculty members who had expertise in the field, because there was no way that I could figure out whether it was misconduct or two researchers trying to use research misconduct as a way of settling what should have been a scholarly argument. I think you're going to add to the burden of the IG, and we're going to have chaos.
Dr. Bienenstock, that's extremely helpful, and I hope we can, we passed it through committee, but I hope we can, before it becomes law, take a look at that to try to reduce as much as possible. I do want to get back to this point that was made by a couple of people, a couple of the testimony, though. We're doing with 42%. That's an estimate. Who really knows what the answer is, but way, way too high. I think we're all agreed on that. The issue, though, is that we can reduce the regulatory burden significantly. Let's assume we can. It's still the number of times you apply for the same grant proposal is going to increase the percentage of time that scientists are spending on paperwork. So again, I do, Dr. Lee-Glauser, I'll ask you, because you talk about the discouraging state of competitive funding. Is this burden, even if we're able to reduce it somewhat by just reducing the paperwork requirements, but is this burden of constantly having to reapply for funds, is that turning off young people to the sciences? Are you seeing an effect on that?
So I think, especially with the...
Turn on your microphone, please, ma'am.
Sorry. I think a greater number of students are thinking twice about going into academics. And I think what I'm really scared of is women and underrepresented minority students. They see their faculty hustling left and right and constantly working 24/7. And I hear from them, if I have to work like that, I'd rather do something else. And yet their idea of coming into university and trying to get a PhD was to teach. And they ended up working elsewhere. I have a number of underrepresented, exceptional underrepresented minority students going into industries, left and right, as well as the government labs.
Okay, thank you. My time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Results were quite often in the the research compliance areas. For those researchers that utilized animals, or those researchers that used human subjects, participants, those were very high burdens for them. And so that's what we looked at, is not only was it prevalent across all researchers, but what were the big pressure points for researchers in general. And so if you had human subjects participants, or if you had animal animal use and care to deal with. Those were very high, and a lot of that is regulatory driven. And then just the financial management, the effort reporting remains to be high across all sectors, because that touches all faculty.
Thanks. I think that's very helpful. Somebody made the comparison between applying for the research grants and getting through that administrative burden and sort of teaching to the test, and that part of the challenge is that researchers are designing their applications more to sort of teach to the way that's done. And I don't know, Ms. Lerner, whether you were able to comment on that at all, but I'm curious as to whether you think that's true and how can that be reduced.
I think the expression was that they were trying to teach to the audit with the idea of avoiding any possibility of a negative audit finding. And I know we're scary people, and I say that in jest, but I recognize that an audit that question costs and tries to take money back from an institution is a frightening thing to have to deal with. What I would say is, really, it's not the audit. We audit to criteria, and the criteria come out of previously the OMB circulars and now the uniform guidance. And so, if we can have a better understanding of and set policies and procedures that are harmonized with the criteria that the federal government has, then there shouldn't be a problem with the audit down the road. And I think what I've heard some of my colleagues here referring to is that sometimes standards are raised beyond what the federal standards require in an excess of caution. And if that can be avoided, that might be an area of improvement.
Dr. Sedwick, you seem to.
Well, I'm the one that said that we administer to the audit. And by that, I mean, keep in mind that the inspectors general for the federal agencies are not the only auditors that are auditing us. Ms. Lerner has alluded to our A133 single audits, and those are conducted by our state, run by our state audit offices for those of us that are state institutions. And so it's not just inspectors general that we're concerned about. I will give you an example. In the uniform guidance, there is much more burdensome subrecipient monitoring requirements. And we already feel that at our institution, and I think some of my colleagues who we have, how you make subawards to, feel like that we are pretty risk averse. Well, our state auditors have already told us they want to talk to us about increasing what we do at our state institutions, and that's really concerning for me, and I think that that's what we're all thinking is coming out of the uniform guidance, is we don't know where not just the inspectors general but our state auditors are going to take this.
That's really helpful. I'm curious, and Dr. Lee-Glauser, I'll ask you if you have a thought on this, but I'm curious as to whether you think that these requirements put any bias in terms of the kinds of universities, the sort of home universities or colleges that, for instance, you mentioned state. Are state institutions having to deal with more of this and therefore biased against? Do the sort of the huge traditional names, are they helped? Or the smaller colleges, if you're from there, they don't have the resources to support scientists as much. Do you detect any of that? Is there? No.
I think Syracuse University as a private institution, we are not a state institution, but we have the same burden.
Right.
We receive funding from the state as well as the federal and different agencies, so we have the same burden.
I know my time is up, but Ms. Lerner, do you have ever detect any sort of? Are you concerned at all about different, the nature of the institution?
Over the years, the IG community has found problems at at every size institution that you can imagine, from the biggest names to the smallest. So there's no guarantee that size prevents problems. What I would say is, in larger research institutions like the University of Texas, my alma mater, and a lovely place, you do have people like Dr. Sedwick, who are able to provide support and ensure an environment where you're more likely to have controls. That may be difficult to replicate at smaller institutions, and certainly when you have small businesses that are receiving funding.
Thank you. I thank the Chairman for his obliging me. I think this is all very, very valuable.